Good morning and good afternoon to all of our attendees. Thank you again for joining an SCRS webinar. Today, we are going to talk about best practices for enabling accelerated and equitable global drug development. Before I get into introducing our speaker, though, we have a few announcements. For those of you who have joined us before, we are going to be running the webinar as we usually do. You will be able to ask your questions in the Q&A icon in your toolbar. Please feel free throughout the session to ask your question. You can just type it in there. And Adam has agreed to take some questions as they come. Of course, we will have some time at the very end also in order to answer those questions. And speaking of the very end, I know a lot of you are here with us today looking to get a contact hour for your time with us, and we're happy to have you do that. So please hang on at the very end, and in your browser, you will see that survey. Please complete that survey as you see it come up so that we can make sure that you have the contact hours. And also in 24 hours from now, you will also get an email from Zoom that will give you a link to today's webinar archive, as well as that survey in case you missed it. So just make sure you're taking a look out for that. If you need anything throughout the webinar or you want to chime in to a piece of content, you can also use the chat there. So you can make sure that you use that chat to let me know anything, to let your colleagues know anything, or to send a quick message over to Adam. You should be able to set that to everyone so that everyone can see something, or if you have a message that you want to send to one individual person, you can do that as well. And before we hand it over to Adam, I just want to let everybody know that we thank you for your membership with SCRS. Many of you are members. And if you're not, please consider joining us at myscrs.org. Take a look at the membership and the membership benefits there. We'd love to have you. We're all excited about the upcoming Global Summit happening in October 7th through the 9th. So please take a look at our website for that too, so that we can see your faces in person. And without further ado, I am going to introduce Adam Wyckoff from H1, Director of Product and Clinical Trials. Adam is going to take you on a little bit of a tour today for these best practices that you've all signed up for. So without further ado, go ahead, Adam, kick it off.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dawn. And hi, SCRS group. It's kind of interesting doing this like not in person, not seeing the group, but I see we have 25 or so folks on the line right now and growing. So that's exciting. I'm Adam Wyckoff. Here, I will move to the next slide. I'm Adam Wyckoff. I'm our Director of Product. I'm going to go over a little bit about what we're going to learn today, and then I'm going to give you my background. So I'm going to start with my background. I've been working in health technology for the better part of 8 years and clinical trials for the better part of 5. Prior to working at H1, I worked at a company called SciAps, where I built and grew our clinical trials offering. I had the pleasure of being on the patient recruitment side with different health systems like Advocate Aurora and Henry Ford, and actually helping them to enroll patients in clinical trials, specifically on the oncology side. So I've seen that side of it, and now I'm on the site profiling, principal investigator analysis side of it. So been able to kind of see both sides of that coin there, and so have a lot of empathy for how hard it is to actually enroll patients in a study, and how working with the right site in the right way is actually super important. So what we're going to go over today, some best practices around data-driven decision making, understanding what it means to be a diverse key opinion leader, which D&I elements are critical for sound strategy, how to source that data for sustainable long-term success, and then some just real-world use cases of how this is being utilized in practice with our current clients and that sort of stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump into it. This looks like a nice lawyerly slide. So where we are right now, I think I gave a talk on this recently, but I'm not going to really focus that much on the current state of affairs. I think you guys are all here because the current state of affairs, which is that there is not a lot of diversity in clinical trials. There are a lot of different statistics about this, but this one showcases that 75% of the folks who are enrolling in clinical trials are white. It starts with inclusion here. And it really is a lot. There are a lot of factors involved. So, race and ethnicity are going to be a focal point here. But I think that we wanted to add this slide and just talk about that there are a lot of different social determinants of health that are, a huge factor in your diversity and inclusion strategy, as well as, what is important from the FDA's perspective. So want to make sure that we consider all of that. Just the one anecdote is I have a good friend who works in multiple myeloma, talks to me a lot about how the patient population is significantly affected by African Americans. 20% of the patients with multiple myeloma are African American, yet only 4% are on clinical trials. And so, this leads to unknown adverse effects in the wild. And this is why we're all here today, is because we want to close a lot of these gaps and understand how we can actually do that in practice. Okay, polling question number 1. Dawn, take it away.
All right, and you should all be able to see your first poll question. Is D&I currently a priority for your organization? If you guys can take just a few seconds, I'm sure we can get all of you to give us a quick response here. And as you know, these polling questions will help Adam to guide the rest of today's session. So it's important that everyone answers so we know exactly how to go to the next step here. All right, well, there is some good news here. I'm sure we are all happy to see this very positive result. So I am going to end the poll since we have the majority of you having now answered. And we do have 83% of today's group saying yes, it currently is a priority, and 17% saying not sure. But the best part here is that it is completely on everyone's radar. So that is great.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that, would love to understand, when we'll go through it a little bit, but how your organization sees diversity and inclusion, and we can kind of talk about how we see it from the data and health technology perspective. And so we lead on H1 with the data. H1 is basically a collection, a single source of truth when it comes to healthcare providers. And we've matched those healthcare providers to institutions as well as clinical trials to deliver, deep investigator profiles to support principal investigator profiling, site profiling, and competitive intelligence in the clinical trials realm. This is a collection of public and proprietary data that comes together to give you that full picture on a given provider. And so really, there are 3 key factors when you're thinking about that strategy. Is, do the doctors or the sites have the relevant patient population? So it always starts with that first, right? So all of this is kind of moot if, you can find a super diverse patient population or a super diverse principal investigator, but if they don't actually have access and are treating the right patients for your trial, then, you can throw the rest of it out the window. The second is trial experience and infrastructure. So have they run a clinical trial, a phase 3 clinical trial before? Have they run a phase 3 clinical trial in the last, 3 to 5 years in areas like diabetes? It's fast moving. If you haven't worked with a continuous glucose monitor, maybe they aren't the right fit for your study. And then the last piece here is academic expertise. So do they have the strong clinical background? How long have they been working in that space? And there's a lot of ways that we'll show you that we actually do that when it comes to the relevant phase and type of trials, the appropriate clinical expertise, and then obviously diversity and inclusion criteria on top of that. So we break the diversity and inclusion information into 3 key areas. So there's the patient data components. So for a healthcare provider or for an institution, a given patient population, we're looking at this from the educational attainment perspective, from the income perspective, from the age perspective, gender, race, and from the provider, race perspective as well. But these are the main data elements when it comes to that, diversity strategy. That's like, these are the main patient attributes. Obviously, race, ethnicity, gender are the focal points here. And then the provider attributes. So back to my days at, SciAps and working with different healthcare providers at Henry Ford, I can tell you first and foremost that ethnicity as well as languages spoken makes a huge difference when it comes to actually recruiting and enrolling a successful patient population. You might be able to get a really strong patient racial mix, but if you don't have the right principal investigator driving that study, I've heard firsthand, I want somebody who looks like me to be running this study. As far as languages spoken goes, understanding and speaking Spanish, having Spanish translators, all of these things are important to actually enrolling and keeping that retention when it comes to these studies. I know that you can enroll a ton of patients up front, and then retention can plague your study. So these are the important things that kind of keep the study going and ensure that you get that right level of mix when it goes throughout the exact study. So gender, languages spoken, ethnicity, patient racial mix, societies, social media links and content, all of that kind of comes together to bring that full picture on the provider as a whole. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And the reason that it's within the context of all of these other data elements. So their affiliation, their contact information, their clinical trials, their congresses, their payments. Obviously, there is claims data associated here as well, to give you that relevant patient population. So all of these pieces of the puzzle kind of come together. And then the site attributes. So, a lot of this it comes down to summarized provider data and summarized patient data. So the patient data is critical, seeing that data summarized at the race, income, education level, and being able to see that information like from the diversity perspective at the patient level, and then being able to roll that up to the provider and then to the institution is really important. And it is really a key piece to the puzzle, because when you're going into an institution, let's say you're going to Moffitt, you don't want to know about, hey, has Moffitt for their breast cancer patients, you don't want to see like, what is the overall race and ethnicity for Moffitt. You want to see for their breast cancer patients, what is the race and ethnicity for those patients, and you're able to do that. And so, the same thing with the summarized provider data. You want to see those languages spoken, ethnicity, patient racial mix at the institution level, and be able to link all three of those together. So those are just like the foundation building blocks that's going to guide the rest of our conversation. And so this is a good time. If you have any questions about those, feel free to ask. And if not, we're going to jump into our second polling question. And then we're going to really go into, more of how this data is used in practice to kind of, cement that data strategy.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, for all of you out there, you should be able to see the poll in front of you, but I'll just read it out loud. Do you currently source any type of data to broaden the diversity and inclusion in your trials for either site investigators or patients? I see many of you are filling that out now, so thanks for doing that. We'll just leave that open just for a second or two more. All right, we have a mixed group here, Adam. All right, we are about at the majority, so I am going to go ahead and share these results. But we are seeing that about 32%, a third of the group, is not sure what data they are sourcing. So Adam, I'm sure you see that a lot, and probably go into a little bit about what that means and how you can encourage data-driven decisions and collection in your organizations. And then we also see that 27% are collecting data for both, and 27% are also not collecting data at all. So you want to go ahead and then tell our audience what the next step should be for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about like how these pieces come together in practice. So when it comes to like sourcing this data, you know, in a lot of ways, H1 is doing like the hard work for you in a lot of that. But when it comes to sourcing the data, you know, obviously just different sources for patient population data. So we're taking, you know, consumer reports, you know, claims information, you know, credit card bureau records, all of these pieces together, and linking those records to an individual patient and tokenizing that to a doctor. So it de-identifies the patient population as well as, you know, puts this together. And so, you know, that is like the process and the sourcing for a lot of that. And that's what you can see like on the right-hand side here. And that kind of pulls together this piece here. So like, you know, let's say, you know, Dr. Adam Wyckoff here. And then this would be my patient population that you're able to see. And then you're able to break that down and say that I'm, you know, treating a primarily Hispanic patient population, and then the age range of those patients, as well as the income and education. And so those income and education pieces kind of come together nicely to showcase where there could be potential health literacy gaps. And so that's how like a lot of our clients are utilizing that information, is that if they're a doctor, maybe they're not treating a pediatric patient population, and they have like a primarily, you know, high school degree patient population, there could potentially be health literacy gaps for understanding why clinical trials are so important for them. So that's kind of like how that patient population data is used in practice. And then on the left-hand side there, when it comes to those, you know, pieces of the puzzle for the provider side, first is sex. Obviously, that information is coming from, you know, claims information, as well as like hospital websites. There are a number of records where we have like, you know, the actual provider's sex easily identified within that. Languages spoken, as well as self-identified race, you know, these are coming from clinical trial registries. So they're self-identified. And so we're, you know, taking that into the product and marrying that with the rest of our profile to kind of give you a full picture of what those providers look like in practice, and which, you know, languages they speak, which races, you know, they are self-identifying as. And so it's a collection of, you know, third-party vendors, claims information, clinical trial registries, hospital websites, and scraping that kind of comes together to bring this full picture to the forefront. Any questions? Feel free to, you know, this is usually where I start to get a lot of questions. So feel free to, you know, chat that in. I'm happy to answer any of the pieces of the puzzle. And
Adam,
then,
we do have one here for you. Why is sourcing outside data beneficial for expanding trial diversity?
so, and I think that when you're saying like outside data, you're talking about like outside of your corporation.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So what I would say is, because it's so important for you to better understand the patient population that these HCPs that you're about to trust to be the principal investigator of your study are actually treating in practice. And so, you know, with a lot of these FDA mandates, we're seeing that more and more of these companies can't go to their regular pool of, you know, PIs that they've used in the past. And so you need to find net new principal investigators, which means that there's risk involved with, you know, these principal investigators. Do they have the right patient population? are they able to actually meet your demands and needs when it comes to their clinical expertise? And so in a lot of ways, we see this as a way to de-risk and to like make data-driven decisions to help you to ensure that you're finding the right doctors for the right study that can actually act on the goals that you have to ensure that you establish those baselines and meet the baselines when it comes to, you know, race and ethnicity standards, as well as safety and efficacy standards for your trials.
All right, we have a follow-up question. Do you have a way to validate this data?
Great question. So the good news is that like a lot of these data sources are coming from like a bunch of different places, and so like and are overlapping. And so we have like a process internally where we are doing like a matching and mapping. We also go through like a data validation when we bring in a net new source. And a lot of what it is that you know, we're taking data, two things. One is if there are multiple sources, there is logic built into our system with one, which is the like trusted or preferred source. So like, you know, like we said, like, you know, some things are coming off of a website, some things are coming off of, you know, a claims record or something that we would deem as like a higher value, more trustworthy source. And so there is a hierarchy of those sources. And then there is also a date at which they are updated. So like when it comes to affiliations, this is like a big piece, is like, you know, doctors move hospitals really quickly. And so, you know, we're taking, you know, what is the most recent and updated information. And so the most important things is that we have the business logic. We can explain all of that to you around that. And then we have the data refreshes within the platform on a weekly, daily basis in some areas to actually ensure that this data is up to date so that when you're making these decisions, you have the right data in front of you.
Great, thanks, Adam. We are caught up with questions at this point.
Okay, awesome. All right, so then the second piece looks like my like blue box has moved on the slide. I could probably fix this. There we are. The second piece is kind of looking at this from the like hospital perspective. So like, let's say you were looking at, I already used like Moffitt or something like that. And then you were looking within the indication of breast cancer. So you would be able to see, you know, the age range, as well as the sex and race of those patients, as well as the income and education levels of those doctors. And so pulling that all together is really important. And then, you know, right above that, being able to see, you know, which doctors actually are treating those patients and who have trial experience and potentially have trials ongoing. And so, you know, altogether that kind of like rounds out a lot of those data elements. You know, at H1, we view ourselves as the single source of truth when it comes to those healthcare providers profiles. And so we have a rich profile that we kind of looked into just from the diversity perspective, but kind of comes together with the trial experience, their publication experience, their claims. And then at the hospital level, you know, outside of the US, we also have, you know, European claims that kind of come into the fold to showcase that patient population. So it's bringing and marrying a lot of these data sources together. And so I see that we got another question here, which is, do you look at international data or just data for the US when identifying investigators? So definitely international data as well. You know, on the on this topic, like at the institution perspective, we are looking at, you know, European claims. We are also looking at ways to expand our like diversity solution internationally. And so a lot of what that does is that diversity data is at a different level. So that data is more at the census level. And so we're instituting and building like map visualizations into the product so that we can overlay those census level information on top of that. And so that will help us both in the US and globally. But I think that, you know, one of the big things is that when you're looking at what the FDA's new guidelines are, it talks a lot about establishing baselines and then actually beating or managing those baselines. And so, understanding what the current like census is for that specific area, whether it's the UK or it's the US, for their patient population of, let's say, like Asian patients, you would be able to actually say, there's a 15% Asian population in this area. We're going to meet or exceed 15% Asian population. And so these are some ways that you're going to be able to like establish those baselines, as well as hit and target specific areas to kind of demonstrate that you are bringing diversity to the forefront from an international perspective. Okay, and then so wanted to talk a little bit more about like what we looked at so far is really quantitative. Like what I wanted to talk a little bit more about now is some of the more like qualitative pieces of the puzzle. So there's a lot more to diversity and inclusion criteria for like site leaders than just, are they self-identified as African American and do they have an African American patient population? There are some folks that are like demonstrate a passion and an interest in actually the topic of diversity and inclusion, and are either going to congresses about it or writing publications about it. And so those are some of the people that we have found that are the most successful when it comes to actually being able to recruit in clinical trials. And so just giving an example of just one investigator here. So they're coming from a background where their languages spoken here are English and Chinese. They're female. And then you can see that we have all the publications information, and then you're able to see that they have a disparity in care of Black inflammatory bowel disease patients. And so that they were able to actually, look into this. They're passionate about this subject. And so while they have some, trial experience here, their ability to, write publications in this area kind of demonstrates and signals that they would be a good partner to work with to actually recruit a diverse patient population, because they are passionate about this subject. And so this is just like one example of one person that we were able to find like within our platform for one of our clients working in that field to actually in the, like the Crohn's disease space to actually stimulate growth and in that area here. So it's not all just like quantitative, hey, do they have a really strong patient population? Because when they're passionate about the subject, we've seen over and over again that their ability to recruit is magnified. And so these are other indications that we look at to help our sponsors actually find the right sites for investigators. And so, this is some of just like a summary of some of the pieces of the puzzle that we talked about a little bit. I think that the main takeaway from like a lot of this information is that the ability for you to understand like their language is spoken, their ability to like look through their patient population and connecting those two pieces of the puzzle together are really important. So like, if they have a language spoken of Spanish and they are treating a high Hispanic population, this might be the right principal investigator for you to actually recruit and retain those Spanish speaking patients for your trial. I've seen within the FDA that they've talked a little bit about how to recruit Hispanic patients, adding to the piece of the puzzle where maybe you can't find this information and you're still trying to increase the level of Hispanic patients within a study, bringing on a Spanish speaking translator to your study. And so this kind of like helps to, add to that piece to the puzzle. And then this is just, talking a little bit about, how we've seen this from the the customer side of how this all comes together. So amassing all of this data in one place obviously like helps you from like a time saving perspective. And so I think that that's one thing that we want to get through is that we've talked to a lot of different customers. Like the way that they're doing this right now is that they're pulling all of these, data sources from individual areas. Maybe they are utilizing census data to say, this area of the country within the United States looks to have a higher African-American patient population, and then there are sites here. And that what we've seen with that approach is that, it's not always a one-to-one match. For instance, you could see a really high patient population of African-American patients in Baltimore, but maybe there is not that high of a patient population at Johns Hopkins, for instance. And so bringing all of these data elements, connecting it at the patient level, being able to roll that up to the institution, as well as to a given HCP, kind of takes a lot of that guesswork out and helps you to find the right site, the right person that first time, which saves you hours and dollars down the line. And so for SCRS and for those sites, I think that understanding and claiming your profile is going to be like an important piece to the puzzle as we go forward within this diversity and inclusion. To help sponsors better understand, the diversity and inclusion at their institutions is claiming those profiles, understanding more about your doctors and your patient profiles, and helping the sponsors to make those right educated decisions. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about okay, so then where does that go? How do you bring all these pieces together? So I see all of this, but how do you bring this together? So, what we developed on our side is what we call an H1 diversity ranking. And then there is an H1 there is a diversity view. And so when we're looking at the view, this goes back to that PI insight slide from the beginning of, what are the right areas to think about? So you type in your indication of choice into the product, and then you're able to see, what is their representative patient population? What is their representative trial experience? And then are they actually treating those patients? So do they have a diverse patient population? Do they have the right trial experience that actually matches, what you're looking for? So not just have they ever done a trial, but have they ever done a phase 3 trial in breast cancer? And then how are they treating those patients with that right diagnosis? And so the last question I got here, are there data solutions able to indicate at a site level what the patient diversity metrics are, or is this based on claims data? So there are data solutions that are able to indicate at a site level, yes. So it is not based on claims data. It is what we're seeing from claims data. You'd be able to see the gender and age. And so those are obviously pieces to the puzzle when it comes to diversity. But other pieces race and ethnicity and income and education, which are part of those social determinants of health, are not included in claims data and are included within our offering that we're able to roll up at the indication level. And so those are through that tokenization process, which we discussed a little bit, of just this idea of, they're being pulled from credit bureaus and from consumer reports and married together through a unique patient identifier and through a token there to de-identify those patient records. And so that is one of the pieces that's proprietary and is able to kind of round out that solution. So, you can't just like utilize any old claims data source. But to an earlier question, like, we've done like a lot of matching of like the claims quality versus other data sources qualities to ensure that they're, of high quality. And so within the US, we're proud to say that we have this information for over 2 million NPIs. And so that represents like 98% of the doctor, and then for the patient information. So when you see like, this doctor's, has 77% Hispanic patients, this is kind of like at that level, what we're talking about with the 2 million NPIs. And then when it comes to the provider information, this is kind of more of a work in progress. So we only have this for 200,000 doctors within the United States. We are constantly improving on that number. And we have a lot of actually new strategies to kind of think about how we expand that. Like another one of the strategies is actually, bringing in different like societies and understanding. So like maybe let's say you can't find their self-identified race through one of these, trial registries, but you're able to understand that they're part of the Black Doctors of America Society. And so adding those societies to their profile is just another data point as like, to help you to pinpoint where they are coming from. And so what I wanted to kind of talk to you about is like, we're able to put these doctors together. We're able to kind of look at them in a collection here. So you can see, how to find net new principal investigators. And then you're able to tag them like we have here, like as diversity influencers within the profiles, and then receive notifications. Like, let's say you find a really good doctor here, but they are, working on 6 different studies right now. And you reach out to them and they say, look, right now is not a good time. You are able to keep tabs on this doctor and actually see when they finish their studies and get notified of that, so that the appropriate time to reach back out. Same thing with like, sites from that perspective on different trials. And so there is a number of areas here where we've been able to, increase diversity of the investigators over a 6-month time frame and improve retention of patients of color within clinical trials, kind of utilizing a lot of these pieces to the puzzle. And then, marrying that with other areas and being able to filter on that, like in conjunction with this idea of like, have they done a study within the last 2 years? Are these patients, like unique patients they've treated within the last 2 years? And kind of adding those temporal aspects, kind of seeing who are rising stars within the space, as well as this idea of diversity influencers through those publications and their social media kind of come together to pull the puzzle together. So that is the full presentation from my perspective. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you learned a little bit. And then, like kind of to summarize, we started by talking through, the problem space. And then we laid the foundation with like, what are the data elements that we consider to be critical when, formulating your diversity and inclusion strategy. Then we talked about how to bring those data elements together and where are some of those sources coming from to actually harbor that information. And then at the end, we talked about, the impact that is having on customers, as well as, the way in which we see this expanding in the near future.
So Adam, the majority of our audience today is made up of sites. And I think we saw from the polling questions that the first poll said that everyone was at least considering D&I as a priority. However, then when we asked the second poll about sourcing data, everyone was a little bit unsure. So you talked a lot about where to source, how to validate. Can you talk a little bit to the sites about how to start a discussion about how to make sourcing data a priority to support their D&I initiatives? Because we know that there's support for the D&I initiative, but we also know that the data has to go along with it. That's a harder process to undertake.
Yep, absolutely. So like from the site perspective, I feel like, it's about better, marketing and understanding your own patient population to start. So like when I used to work with like Advocate Aurora, Henry Ford, it's about, understanding who are the patients that they're seeing, being able to aggregate that information, and then being able to kind of showcase where there are diverse patient populations, making that known to sponsors and to the field. And so a lot of that kind of like reigns true through our offering. But I think that there is more that these sites can do to actually harvest that information from the ground up. So, a lot of this information is living, within their EMRs on this. I think that there is a lot of information that can be leveraged to kind of better promote their brand as like a site for diversity and inclusion, and then like kind of showcasing where there is success. So it's not only about where they're able to source that information, but it's also about showcasing when they have successful trials and when they have are able to actually meet those diversity standards, being able to kind of display that information. And that kind of goes into a whole another part of our strategy around like clinical trial performance data and showcasing that in a more open and transparent way.
And do you have, like you were saying earlier about it being a marketing function, and I also know that we have social media allows us to present these types of stories and why the data was so important, and really having a story that is validated by data makes it something that is far more intriguing to people. Are you seeing that social media has helped to assist in the success of more diverse trials?
Absolutely. We're pulling in social media on healthcare providers. At first, I thought it was a kind of a gimmicky thing of, what do I care what, somebody is tweeting. But what you realize pretty quickly is that, we have algorithms that are able to detect like the sentiment and then also, the content. And so you can see if somebody is tweeting about diversity and inclusion overall, that kind of develops that passion. And what we're seeing over and over again is that they're tweeting about different real, publications that they're writing and that other people are writing and promoting like publications, and that, for the healthcare provider community, social media is a way to kind of share different publications that they believe are novel and actually are making an impact on the industry. And so that is kind of how I see social media taking hold and establishing diversity leaders. Additionally, like even in LinkedIn bios, we're seeing different doctors, add that as like part of their hashtag, and then that is being picked up by a lot of our algorithms as like, this could potentially be a diversity influencer in the space.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I think social media has been a bit of an uncomfortable space for clinical trials, clinical research, and all the parties involved. But it is starting to becoming, because it's so mainstream, it's something we can't avoid. So at SCRS, we have been including social media topics in as many of the programs as we can, because we do want people to become more comfortable with it. So these types of stories are great validation for why we should be paying attention to it. All right, I have a few others for you. So do you think it will take more federal mandates to drive better diversity and inclusion in trials?
I think that these federal mandates are like right around the corner. So like, I feel like, they started in 2016. Then there were more federal mandates recently around suggestions. I've talked to multiple customers that are, they're nervous about being, especially like in the oncology space, being the first one to get a proposal actually like rejected from the FDA for diversity and inclusion. I think that the more that the real world evidence showcases and like spotlights the problems in clinical trials and the disparities, the harder that this is going to be to run away from. And I think that they're going to have to get more and more firm on this topic, which will help, spur this much needed, change in the industry, because a lot of these drugs are going to market without understanding those adverse side effects on different patient populations.
Okay, we got another one. If the study coordinator is fully bilingual, does the site still have to use interpreters at the time of consenting? Would that be considered conflict of interest? What about enrolling family members on the study? Sorry, this is a three-part question.
It's a good question. So I think that the way that I've seen it play out in practice, and I think that the answer, unfortunately, is probably going to be, it depends with, which area. But how I've seen this play out is you still have an interpreter because maybe, it depends on how big the study is. But it is a way to cut cost and to, help with retention, because when you're able to have a bilingual, study coordinator or principal investigator actually run that study, they're able to, explain this information, close health literacy gaps, close, language barriers in a way that improves retention. So I would say the way that I've seen this play out is that they don't have to use interpreters, and they're able to leverage, the staff on site. But obviously it depends on the site itself.
Great. Okay, Adam, that is about, oh, hold on one second. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that is all we have for questions. Well, Adam, thank you so much for doing this with us today. And thank you to H1 and Elizabeth, who's been behind the scenes and working with us. We thank you all for being part of today's session. And we do invite you to take a look at the SCRS website for future webinars, whether from H1 or some of our other sponsors and organizations that are supporting the next phase of clinical trials. We do, as mentioned, I will have the survey up for you as soon as we close out today's webinar. So if you want to take that survey for contact hours or just want to give your feedback, we appreciate it. And then finally, just as a reminder, we do have the Global Summit coming up in October, and there is no time like the present to register. So please take a look at the website. Again, Adam, thank you so much. Elizabeth, behind the scenes, thank you. And we look forward to working with you again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.